Okay, hello everyone, Victor Momo from Excel Moments, and in this video I want to solve a CD request using, well, I won't tell you, but it's one of those problems where you can't solve it with maybe a formula. Yeah, obviously not. Power query, surely not. Office scripts, not likely. Python in Excel, no. But VBA can solve it. Then like VBA, yes, VBA, and this is just to make a case for VBA and to say, hey, I'm not dead. I'm still here. I can still solve some CD requests. Okay, so let me show you what the problem is in this case. And this is just to make a case like, yeah, VBA still has some use. All right, so you have this from your boss where you have, the first name, last name, and he wants you to concatenate, that to get, the full names, but make sure that all the last names are in bold. Okay, so basically I'm going to concatenate first. So equals dynamic arrays. I can do Control Shift down. I do an ampersand with a space. I do another ampersand, and then I come back up. Then I select the last name. Control Shift down, Control backspace always brings me back, to the active cell, and then I do enter. All right, so now I have, the values concatenated. I'm going to paste as values. So I'm going to copy, Control C, and then I can use Control Shift V. Okay, and then that's paste as values. Okay, so now we have it as values. So what he wants is, in this case, Smith should be bold here, Johnson should be bold. In cases like this, De Bruyne, De Bruyne should be bold. Of course, you can't use, like the bold here on the ribbon, because that's going to bold in, the entire thing. Except, of course, you can select the particular string you want and, make it bold. But you have to then go one after the other doing all of that. Here, I only have about 40, rows of data, but imagine you had 400 or maybe 600 of them. You don't want to do that manually. So I'm going to show you how to do that with VBA. It's a problem that we can solve in maybe like say 2 minutes, in terms of writing the code, but because I'm going to be explaining, so it could be a little long, but bear with me. I mean, it's more for you than me, right? I'm explaining for myself, but you understand what I mean. Okay, so the first thing would be, to at least write it in a way that is dynamic. So you don't want to write it and hard code the number of rows. So you want to write in your code something that is able to figure out, how many rows of data I have. So the way we typically do it in VBA is this, right? If I want to get to the end of this data, what I always do is, I will do Control down from here, right? And this takes me to, the last row. Okay, but if for any reason, there's a space here, and then you go back up and you repeat that exercise, you see that it stops there, right? So it stops where it meets like the first space. Okay, so because of this, we typically don't do it that way in VBA. What we do in VBA is we go to the bottom, right, which is going to the last row of data like you have here. So we'll go to the last row of data, and then we do Control up. Okay, so the assumption is that if I get to the bottom, and I do Control up, the first non-blank cell I meet is obviously the last one if I were coming from the top. Okay, so I go to the bottom and then I come up, and that's basically what we do there. Okay, so I'm going to go into VBA now and then, start to write the code, and I kind of try to explain, a few things just for people who are not familiar with VBA. For those who are very familiar, you're like, hey, Victor, you're wasting our time. No, I'm not. We need to get everybody along. Okay, so Alt F11 will take us into the Visual Basic Editor, VBE. What you need to do is to insert a module where you're going to write your code. So you can do insert, and do module. I typically like to use the shortcut Alt, I, and M. Does the same thing. Okay, so for those of you who are scared of VBA, this should make it look easy. So we're starting up a subroutine. So you start with the keyword sub, and then you give your code some name. So maybe I will say make bold code. That's the name of the code I want to write. Okay, so now I'm going to declare some variables, which are just containers that will hold something at some point. So I want to create empty containers first, and I'll fill them up as I go. So the first thing is, okay, maybe I need to have a variable to represent the worksheet I'm on, because my workbook would have multiple worksheets, but I want you to know that I'm dealing with this particular worksheet. So I could call that WKS, right? So that's the worksheet I want to be on. I know that I would need to go from row to row to do whatever operations it is I want to do. So I may have a variable that needs to go from row to row. Typically we use I, there. So you can call this an integer, but if you make it an integer, it's only going to stop at 32,767 rows. So if you suspect that you're going to have much more, then you declare it as, long. So what you're just doing here is just telling, Excel or VBA, like for this container you're creating, this is what I expect to come in there, right? Is it going to be a text? Is it going to be a number? Is it going to be a cell, a range, right? So then I need a variable to represent the last row of data, right? So that I know what my last row is. So I could also make that, long. Then I may need, a variable to represent the text, which is like that full name, right? So maybe I just call that cell text, and then I make that a string, because that's a text, right? Okay, so now this is just creating empty containers. Now you need to assign them to something. So it's like you go buy a box and just an empty box and tell them, hey, give me a box that can, fit this and this and this. Okay, so you take the box home. Now you want to put the items in the box. Okay, so for WKS, which is the worksheet, I want to say here, set WKS, which is I want to assign it to something. I want to make it, the worksheet that has this name. Look at my Excel here. Sorry, I lost my mouse briefly. All right, here. So that's what make bold. So that's the name of the sheet. So I'm going to call this make bold. So it knows that everything I'm doing on the make bold sheet. So if I had more than, one sheet, it knows where to operate on. Okay, so good. So that's that. So now let's find that last row that we're talking about. How do we find the last row? We do exactly what I described before. In column B, which is a representative column, I will go to the bottom of column B and I will press Control up. Okay, and that should, wherever that lands, that's the row I'm interested in. So I can use range, which is the other word you use for cells here in VBA. I say, okay, range B. I want to know, how many rows we have. Normally I could write it like this, right? Because I know the number of rows. But again, you want it to be dynamic in case the person is using a different version of Excel, maybe like 2007, where the number of rows is different. So I will do B and rows.count. So what this basically says, sorry, this should be an and. Okay, so what this basically says is determine, how many rows, or count the number of rows you have in there, and then concatenate it with the B. So if it is 1000, this will be B1000. If it's 10,000, B10,000. Okay, so this is you getting to the bottom, of Excel. So you're now in the last, cell in column B, and then you want to do Control up. So the way we do that here is to use the end, and then we put the direction. So you can see there are different directions. If you are doing Control right, Control left, Control up. So in this case, we do Excel up because we are doing Control up. Okay, so this takes us to, that cell, which is like the last cell we really need. But now we're interested in what row are we on. Okay, so that's the dot row. So this basically will tell us the last row in there. Let me, pop this up by using the message box. Okay, all right, so let's play this. This is just going to give us a dialog that shows us 43. So it's telling us that the last row is row 43. Okay, so if this changes and you add more data here and you run that code, the code will update. So that's just why I did that. So this row isn't exactly needed anymore. So I'm going to comment it out with an apostrophe. So now let's go into the portion where we loop. Okay, so we do for I equals to, so we are looping from where? The names here start from row 4. Okay, I don't want to do anything with this header row, which is row 3. So I want to start from row 4 all the way to L row. L row is the last row. So whatever L row is, 43, 50, 100, 70, this is going to go, all the way there, and then do next I. Okay, so the way this is going to work is it's going to start with I equals to 4. It will do something with 4. When it's done, it will come back. It will do with 5, do 6 until it gets to the last row, and then it stops. Okay, so the first thing I can do is I have this variable I created here, which I call cell text. I just want to assign cell text to be the value in column D, which is basically the full name. Okay, so I can say here that cell text is equals to WKS, which I could have added before last row here too, just to make it know that it's obviously on that particular worksheet. Okay, so I could have done that there just so that in case you're on another sheet, it won't be finding the last row there. So yeah, so here I can say WKS.range, D, and I dot value. I explain what this is, right? So what this basically is that if I is 4, what this it means is that on the worksheet, which is make bold worksheet, look at range D4, which is cell D4, and pick the value in there. So that's basically this. Okay, so that's the value in there. So by the time I becomes 5, he goes to D5, D6, D7. That's basically what that is. So cell text is just picking up the value inside that cell. All right, okay. So now we can now do something with that, particular cell. So this is where the magic happens. Okay, so range D and I, which in this case is like, just take I as 4 for the first case. So what we want to do is, what do you want to do with range D and I? I want to look at the characters in there. When I say the characters in there, is that it's a string, and character 1, character 2, character 3, character 4. I want to look at all the characters. Okay, and then here you see what it gives you. It gives you a start and then the length. So what he's saying is that, what characters do you want to look at? Where do you want to start from? I don't want to start from the first character. Why don't I want to start from the first character? Because I'm interested in just making the surnames bold, which is like the last name. Sorry, Nigerians are used to saying surnames as opposed to last name. Anyway, okay, so what I need to do here is find the position of the space. If I can find the position of this space +1, that's where the surname starts. Okay, so find the position of the first space. I'm lucky because in my example, everybody's first name is just one name, right? So find the position of the first space, and then once you get that +1, which is the first character of the surname or the last name, then pick everything from there going forward. So the question now is, how do I get the position of the first space? In VBA, you can use a function like inString, which is kind of where you use like search or find in Excel. So if I do inString, see what inString asks me for. It says, okay, where are you starting from? Start from 1. It says, what string are you searching in? Cell text. Don't forget that cell text basically has, the value in that cell. Okay, so cell text, and then I tell it, look for a space. Let me show you, how this kind of works here. Just a minute. So look at inString. So say we are looking for a space in my name, Victor Momo. Okay, so Victor is 6 characters, so the space is obviously the 7th character. So, okay, that's what it gives you. So it's going to tell us the position here of the space. We can do a +1, right? Because a +1 will now say, yes, I'm not interested in making that space bold, but the thing after. Okay, so then it says how many characters, which is the length now. So after you get the position there, how many characters? The characters you're interested in will just be the length of the last name. So if I'm here and I get the position of this space and I move by 1, how many characters do I want to make bold? I need the length of Smith. If I know the length of Smith, I tell it that and it makes that bold. Now I can, be very finicky and try to calculate that, but I could also just say, hey, as in, let me put a number that is larger than what anybody's last name can ever be. And what Excel will basically do is just go from where it is all the way to the end, right? So I can use something like 100. Okay, so that's just me being, too smart for myself. So it's not going to see 100 characters, obviously. So it's going to stop wherever it stops. Okay. So with this, we've selected that, we want from the character after the space, 100 characters, that way. And then we say we want the font, the bold property of the font to be equals to true. Okay. So basically, what this would read like, because we kind of read VBA from right to left, is like saying, okay, as in make bold, the font of characters from wherever this is, maybe X, to character or 100 characters from there or to the end, in cell D, whatever. I is 4 in this case, so D4. So when it does this for D4, and it's like, okay, I've done it. He goes to the next one. He does D5, D6, D7, D8, and so on. So it's very easy. Like I said, I could write this in maybe 1 minute, 2, but of course, I'm kind of explaining, which I like to do, and that's why it's taking much time. So let's just debug and see if we don't have any errors. Okay, kind of looks like it's good, but let's see if it works. So push this to the side, and then we're just going to run it and see it side by side. Let's see. Okay, so you can see now it's done that. And even the guy who has De Bruyne is bold, this one, De La Cruz. Of course, this can easily get messed up if you just write formulas and press enter again. Everything is gone. That's why I said it's a silly request. But at least for a one-time thing, instead of doing all that, I can just have this code, keep it somewhere in case this request comes up, and then I can, pull that up. So if this is something you feel you may do a little more frequently, it's good to, keep it somewhere that you could access. So let me show you an example. So one, you could put it in the personal macro workbook, but I don't want to get into that. So what I just want to do is just make it easily accessible without having to, maybe open VBA. So one thing you could do is you could add, maybe a shortcut to it so that when you execute that shortcut, the code runs, or you could even add it to the quick access toolbar. So for example, come here and you do customize quick access toolbar, right? So now you come to the commands you want and say you want macros. So you look for that macro. I think I called it make bold. Yeah, so make bold code. So I add it in here. So it's going to be on the ribbon. Then I can, what's it called? Move it up. Okay, so let me just say I move it somewhere here. You could change, the icon and stuff like that. But anyway, that's okay. All right, so let's see. This is it here. Okay, so make bold. So press Alt on your keyboard. You kind of see the shortcut there. So you can see it's in position 6. So what that means is that if you press Alt 6, it's going to basically execute that macro. So Alt 6 is the same thing as coming in here, and running this code. But in this case, I don't need to open this, so long as, of course, that code is at the back end here. So I will just select those cells, because I want to do that, but really I don't need to, right? Because the way I've written the code is that I kind of start from, cell 4 and go all the way down. So I actually don't need to do this. And then I just do Alt 6. Believe me that I'm pressing Alt 6. Okay. And then that code executes. Okay, so that way you kind of have it handy, and you can use it at least in this workbook. If you want it to be available in all your workbooks, then you put it in a special workbook called the personal macro workbook. That way it's accessible to all workbooks. So once you keep it somewhere, you can then execute a code and it runs, and everything is done. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Much longer than I thought it would be, but I'm happy about that. So if I could stay through recording it, you could also stay through watching it, but you can also fast forward it. All right. So, but anyway, I guess you get the idea, and then, you also can see how we think about, some of these things. But yeah, again, I know a lot of those properties in VBA, so that's why I was able to know what to pull up at, at every point in time. But I hope it helps to give you some idea, VBA. So if you're scared, kind of a good way to kind of go, in. So if you like this video, please hit the like button. You can also subscribe to the channel. Excel Moments. For now,